discussion. This is not one of those things where we say that and then, it's bold and you blab on forever. So, and I'm going to say a lot of stuff that most of you probably already know about, if not in passing and sometimes in very elaborate detail. And so what I'm going to try and do is take that information and package it in a very different way. I am a practicing Christian. I see myself as one of the people of the book in the Abrahamic tradition of Jews, Christians, and Muslims, all of whom have fought for a long time but don't have to. So I mention that because I never set out to study anti-Semitism. I was actually hired by Greenpeace to study the anti-environmental movement. And I created a false persona. That's a sneaky way of saying I went inside an organizational annual meeting as someone else. Printed out my own cards, and mostly what I did is I talked to people at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And it was a organization of corporate surveillance and security groups, and U.S. federal agencies and international agencies. And my job for Greenpeace was to ask these people if they thought Greenpeace was a terrorist organization or funded by Moscow. Because this was going around. This was quite a while ago. And so I went, and I have to say, a lot of these people are folks I had studied with something called the Public Eye Network as repressive right-wing, surveillance and security firms who did industrial security, the American Society for Industrial Security. So, most of the people said, no, not really. The worst thing that's going to happen is they'll hang from your roof and it'll be embarrassing, with a big flag. But then a few people came forward during that sort of Q&A I did with them and said, yeah, they're funded from Moscow and they're terrorists and it's only a matter of time before they launch their plot. And I had breakfast with one naval intelligence officer who said exactly the same thing. I thought, wow. That's really fascinating, and went back and wrote an article for Greenpeace magazine about it. And then somebody said, well, where else does this go on? So, I worked for Political Research Associates, which was founded by Jean Hardesty, who was a lesbian feminist organizer. And she said, well, why don't you look at conspiracy theories around gay people? And I said, oh, okay. And so I started doing that, and I ended up doing a whole lot of research. And it's sort of like, it doesn't take a great intellect to figure out that there are some similarities, right? Because they are always out to get us. They are plotting secretly. They don't really like their children like we do. They have a secret plot to subvert us through treason. And so, I did not have a college degree, I'm a dropout, but about 25 years ago I started writing peer review articles. and I've now published about 30 peer review articles in various places, the book chapters and articles. So I called up some friends of mine who did research into conspiracy theories, and I said, so what's this about? And they said, well, you have to go back to the Middle Ages. Isn't that just like a professor? You have to go back to the Middle Ages. Great, thanks. So I went back to the Middle Ages, except not, physically, because that would be like TV. But what happened then was it became obvious that people before me had already figured out the paradigm, that this was in fact a process that began in the Middle Ages. But why? Well, Christian discrimination against Jews was nothing new. But in the Middle Ages, there was a kind of hot spot of thinking that Jesus was coming back really soon now, and we have to sort of purify the land from these satanic influences. And one of those influences is Jews, because they have horns on their head. Now, you may think that's funny, because I do, horns on their head. When I was in Chicago in the 70s, I used to go to a temple up on the North Shore and do a lecture to their students going off to college about if they went to some Midwestern colleges, there would be people who would feel their head. Because the students from the previous year were coming back saying, this guy felt my head and wondered where my horns were. That was kind of shocking, that level of weird anti-Semitic belief would be around. And then it became pretty obvious that this was a way of seeing the world which valorized the oppression of some other who was seen and developed as a scapegoat and seen as threatening on an existential basis the real people. Whoever the real people were, you know, the Jews were not the real people, and so it didn't matter where you were. So, okay, that's all very interesting. You know a lot of that. I'm going to fast forward and then jump back. Fast forward to about 6 years ago, I was asked to write a study of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia on campus. Not that they're the same, but they both existed on campus, and we did field studies, and, you know, oh, let's do like this social science. We sent a person with a Jewish background and a person with a Muslim background to the same campuses, asked them to interview the same people, and then write reports separately and not show them to each other. And both of them came back and said, well, there's anti-Semitism on campus, but it's nothing like it's appearing in the press, especially the Jewish press. It's just not. There are incidents, there are battles over Israel-Palestine, but there's not this huge upsurge in anti-Semitic hate crimes, quote unquote, on campus. We thought that was kind of interesting. And then other people started to do studies and reveal the same thing. Meanwhile, the mainstream media is talking about this incredible wave of crimes against Jews. Now, it's not that that wasn't happening in a lot of places, it's that it was not happening in the way that the mass media was reporting it. In some cases, there were incidents in both Islamophobic incidents and anti-Semitic incidents where people later apologized for having acted out badly. That was never reported. In some cases, colleges would do studies of the alleged event, and like at Columbia, and say, none of this happened. We were unable to verify any of the major allegations of what happened at Columbia that were labeled as anti-Semitism. Well, that's kind of creepy, you know, that the mainstream media keeps replicating this. And so then there was a pushback saying it is impossible to compare oppression against Jews with oppression against Muslims, to which I answer, why? Oppression is oppression. Systems of oppression can be studied no matter who it's against, whether it's gender, race, class, and I was told that that was anti-Semitic. Well, but by whom? By major Jewish organizations who had been putting forward all these claims that had turned out to be largely refuted. Even though what we discovered by sending people to like campuses all over the country, individual investigators, was that in fact there were anti-Semitic incidents and there were Islamophobic incidents, and in many cases the colleges reacted very quickly, but that quick response and getting people together and making people stand up and say that was wrong was not reported. What was reported was the original interpretation of the event, and this happened at a number of campuses. Now, so let's jump back to the Middle Ages. So from the Middle Ages forward, this has been an issue which has been dealt with in several ways. If you come forward to a period of Catholic, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, you're going to love this one. The Red Jews are the Amazons with weapons living in the Alps. I have a friend who's a professor who studied this, wrote a book like that thick on the written tracts surviving from that period, primarily in Germany, of this fantasy that there were these Jewish shock troops training like the Amazons, except they were in the Alps. They never appeared, but this became a very widespread thing. At one point, so many anti-Semitic conspiracy theories led to so many attacks that the Pope said, stop doing this. Just stop. And the Pope was ignored, because this was a popular function of defending the turf of the people doing the attacks. It elevated their status, it made them feel safer, and the Pope could go grind in Italy for all they cared. Because this was about their idea of who the proper community was. So, let's go forward then to who was the first group in the post-apocalyptic, post-Catholic pogrom kind of stuff to be labeled as part of the conspiracy against God and government, and it was the Freemasons. So the first major written tracts about this vast conspiracy with all the same, they control the banks, they control the institutions of higher learning, they control money, they control blah, 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 blah. And they do all these things. There's a whole list. 2 books written in the late 1700s that make these allegations. And they focus on the Freemasons and the secret core group inside the Freemasons. Some of you are already smiling because you know where the others are coming. There was a secret core group inside the Freemasons called the Illuminati. Now, in fact, there was a group called the Illuminati. A guy named Weishaupt ran it. It was a debating society that talked about a new vision of public order in which the government was separated from the church and popular input came from the people. This was revolutionary, and it was denounced in 2 books in the late 1700s. The Illuminati was suppressed in Bavaria and just eliminated. I mean, not actually eliminated, but they are suppressed. So why do I mention this? Because what comes next is the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which says inside the Jewish conspiracy are the learned elders. And in fact, if you read the Protocols, I don't recommend it. It's really boring and stupid. I have collected at Political Research Associates over 30 different publications of the Protocols, at least 3 of which claim to be the original transcript of the meeting. And it's like handwritten, as if somebody smuggled it out from the learned elder. So that's pretty industrious because it's like 200 pages long and you handwrite it all out. So, okay, so you have then this model that starts with the Illuminati and the Freemasons. And in the Protocols, it actually says, and those who think it's the Freemasons, it's the Jews behind the Freemasons. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh. This is awful stuff, but if I don't laugh, I, would be like sitting in an attic, shaking. Because this stuff is all over the world in multiple languages, and is very popular among some Islamic clerics who continue to publish books about the Protocols. And in fact, the Freemasons, if you actually read some of the stuff that's written, they still say, and the Freemasons are still implicated. Now, you should know that there are Christian groups in the U.S. that do not allow their members to be Freemasons because, obviously, it's a plot and they're satanic. Now, why does it matter that they're satanic? Well, let's go back. If you're a Christian, there's 2 ways of looking at the book of Revelation, other than admitting, like most scholars do now, that it didn't belong in the Bible, it was a mistake. Well, let's say we can't bring ourselves to say that. There are 2 ways to look at the book of Revelation. One is, it's a mysterious set of metaphors about struggle against evil. If you buy a Catholic Bible, it says that in many of the editions. Please read this as a metaphor. However, among conservative Christian evangelicals who read the text, and all religions that read secular text literally, and then say only they know how to make sense of it and what it really means, it's not the literal reading that's the problem as much as insisting that there is only one literal reading. Now, in the Baptist church, you used to be able to read the Bible any way you wanted, and then they actually were allowing women to become ministers. Well, we stopped that. So now Baptists have to agree on a particular reading of the Bible, and all of my friends who were called to serve God inside the Baptist faith, who were women, were expelled. So that's just part of this growing, wonderful Christian right that we have. Now, why does the Christian right worry about some of this stuff? It's because, jump back, who were the settlers who committed the genocide against the native people and brought Africans over as slaves and killed many of them, and a genocide as well. They were the people who couldn't get along with anyone else in England. They were fanatics, and they were asked to get out of Dodge. And they did, and they came over here. Now, in their mind, remember, if you're a Christian, you can interpret the apocalypse as saying, right before Jesus comes back the second coming of Christ, there is a huge battle between good and evil. Now, okay. Part of that battle requires, if you're an evangelical conservative Christian with this particular view, which is codified by Tim LaHaye in what he calls, non-fiction books, and in a whole series of fiction books about the apocalypse. And so, here's the issue. When this confrontation takes place, according to this particular and I find obnoxious view of what the sacred text means, satanic figures appear. There is a false prophet and an antichrist. And they basically try and get high government officials and high religious figures are part of a conspiracy led by them. And so the Antichrist is like Satan's sidekick in the last days. Well, okay, so that's what the settlers who came over here pretty much thought. And they were looking for signs of the times. So when you ask an evangelical Christian who reads Tim LaHaye and the Bible on his basis, if you can go up to them, you can feed them wonderful lines like, do you see the signs of the times? If they are apocalyptically excited, they will say, oh yes, it's so amazing that I'm going to be living in the period when Christ returns. That's what we found when we interviewed the Promise Keepers on Mall. All of the reporters there were right around saying, they're nice guys, they're hugging and we go around for working with Boston University Center for Millennial Studies saying, do you see the time is running out? Do you see the signs of the times? Do you see the footprint of all that is evil among us? And they go, oh yeah, and we have long conversations. So almost all of this apocalyptic frenzy that continues to mobilize the Christian right to vote Republican for the last 30 years, 15% of the voters leaving the polls are Christian right activists, many of whom believe that Jews are in league with Satan and liberals are in league with the Antichrist. They believe Islam is a false religion and is plotting to stop Jesus from coming back. So, fun fact, Temple Mount in Jerusalem is known as Haram el-Sharif among Muslims. According to 3 religions, the end times narrative for Jews, Christians, and Muslims involves that piece of land called the Temple Mount or Haram el-Sharif. Therefore, very much of the anti-Semitism that is coming out of the Muslim community is prompted by imams who are taking very disputed hadith sayings and modifying them to say that we're now in the moment when brave young Muslim men have to gather north of Jerusalem and form a wall, an army of black flags that will march on Jerusalem and reclaim the Temple Mount from Muslims. Part of that then is woven into this idea that Jews are satanic. So we now have then a number of different ways in which Jews are satanic. And what do? They conspire. They conspire all sorts of ways. They conspire to control the money supply. They conspire to control the educational system, which is exactly what was said in the original claims in the 2 books in the late 1700s about the Freemasons and the Illuminati. It was simply rewritten and plagiarized by other sources in the protocols. And then it is used by the Russian oligarchy to focus scapegoating against the Jews to lead pogroms because they were unable to keep downwardly mobile people in line, and so they created a set of scapegoats to distract attention by blaming the Jews. Oh, this is unfamiliar? Perhaps I'm mistaken. So, you then get, this is marvelous, it gets translated in English and published in England. Who reads it? Henry Ford. Henry Ford. Oh my God, it's a conspiracy. So he starts printing essentially summaries of the protocols of the elders of Zion, including one that was so short and so small it would fit in the glove box of every Ford Motor Car sold for several years. Every glove box, you open it up, there'd be a little essay about the perfidy of the cabal of Jews. Anybody? Oh, this is my audience. Who knows where cabal comes from? The cabal. Right. So a cabal is a group of Jews plotting against the real people. Why did this matter? Because every conspiracy theory in the United States, I'm not going to say for every country, every conspiracy theory in the United States, no matter from what political direction, is rooted in anti-Semitic stories, and it is structurally and effectively anti-Semitic. Now, when I say that, I've had people scream and stand up and throw things. I believe this to be true. And when I started to write, I actually co-wrote the new entry in the Encyclopedia Judaica, second edition, on neo-Nazism. We had conversations. They didn't just pluck people and say, oh, write something. We had meetings where we talked about this stuff, and a number of scholars came together and said, yeah, you know, we get in trouble when we say that, but we think that's right too. I mean, just because of the way it just shapes out in our culture in the United States, that always there's been this connection between Satan Jews and conspiracy allegations. So why does that matter if we're progressive and we want to look at how to change some of these things? Well, what happens if it's true? Let's say it's true that the world is run by 12 Christian white men down at Wall Street drinking, 35-year-old scotch. Could be true. Can't prove it. They're not going to let you in. But so let's just throw away all the hundreds of years of power structure research. Ignore, Mills, ignore Dahoff, ignore Holly Sklar, ignore all these people who've written about power structures in the United States. We're going to have to locate those 12 men drinking scotch in the basement in Wall Street, and when we do, everything will be all right. There'll be no racism, there'll be no sexism, there'll be no religious bigotry. Everyone will have turkey or, tofu on the table for Thanksgiving, and it'll be a glorious, this is bullshit. It is a fantasy. It is an escape mechanism for people who can't engage in power struggle in the real world. And I know that's a harsh assessment, but I've had it. Because what happens then is when you believe the conspiracy exists, if a handful of people that is deformed and otherwise benevolent capitalist system in which there is no systems of oppression based on race, class, and culture, you have liquidated the ability to raise issues of power that actually can change the way things work in the United States. And if you do it consistently enough, it undercuts all struggles against oppression, whether it's oppression